started to grow. And therefore, the Israeli Arabs, especially after they were released from the military government in 1966, felt more and more self-confidence to lay claim. And they laid claims towards the Israeli society because Israeli society permitted that. Israel, as a democratic country, both for reasons of its self-image and for reasons of projecting an image of liberal and democratic society to the outside, permitted that kind of thing, which again, on the one hand, promoted the self-confidence of the Arabs, on the other hand, eroded the self-confidence of the Israeli Jewish population in its entitlement to the land, in the entire Zionist endeavor, and so on and so forth. And that process continues to grow. As we go to the third circle, which is the Arab circle, Bedouins consider themselves, of course, also not only Palestinian, not only Bedouins, not only Israelis, but also Arabs. And they consider themselves, by reason of being Arab, as part of the majority in the area of the Middle East. Sure, there are minorities as Bedouins, as Arabs within Israel, which is a Jewish majority culture. But if they are identified as Arabs, they identify themselves as so. They teach in their classes Arab history, Arab poetry, Arab literature. They speak in Arabic, and their curriculum within Israel is in Arabic. Then, of course, their Arabic identity can also, or may also, gain in importance in their minds. And as it does so, it is also more and more accepted by the Jewish majority as part of the entitlement of the Arabs to feel themselves Arabs. And of course, if they belong to that great Arab world, to its history, a world of 22 Arab countries and 300 million Arabs, that gives them a lot of self-confidence that while they are temporarily a minority in their land, they are certainly a majority for the long run in the entire space of the Middle East. And finally, the fourth circle is the Islamic circle. You are all aware that in the past 20 years or so, there has been a surge of Islamic, what we call fundamentalism, in the Middle East. And that Islamic fundamentalism has seeped into the identity of the Bedouins as well. Not a long time ago, there was a Mr. Kassasi, that says probably knows, who became the mayor of Rahat, one of those townships built by Israel to concentrate the Bedouins in the Negev. And that Mr. Kassasi was a part of the Islamic movement in Israel. Now, the Islamic movement in Israel has increased in the acuteness of the conflict which separates Israel from the Arabs. Because if before the equation was already too bad for Israel, because it was small Israel with 3 million Jews at the time versus 150 million of the Arabs at the time. Now, if you add to that equation the question of Islam, then of course it makes the issue even much worse, because that very small population of Jews is pitted, if you like, against that huge population of 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. Adding countries which are not Arab, and therefore they never belonged to the Arab-Israeli conflict, on the side of the Arabs, not because they are Arabs, but despite the fact that they are not. And in fact, they are adding themselves to the side of the Arabs because of Islam. The most stunning example being Iran, of course, which had nothing to do with the Arab-Israeli conflict, but nevertheless has become, as you know, the most virulent enemy of Israel in the Middle East because of their Islam. Now Bedouins, who have been instilled with that same Islamic surge, can of course be very proud, and they are, of the fact that this Ahmadinejad appears in the UN or elsewhere, promising to wipe out Israel, and therefore Arabs of Israel, including the Bedouins, draw from that a great hope, seeing that now it's no longer Arabs who were defeated repeatedly by Israel who backed them, but they have the backing of 1.5 billion Muslims around the world, including 57 Muslim countries, spanning the 2 continents of Asia and Africa. And that, of course, reinforces them in their conviction that they have no reason in the world why they should give up anything. They say if they continue to oppose staunchly Israel, if they continue to stand firm, they will finish by winning, because history, they say, on their side. And those concerns and that way of thinking is being mainly reinforced by Islamic leaders, including the leader of the Islamic movement in Israel, Raed Salah, who has been promising in Islamic terms that the ultimate gain is that of the Arabs, of the Muslims, of course, and his success among Israeli Arabs, including among the Bedouins, has been growing in a very dramatic way, precisely because of the surge of Islam all around us, and especially now in this spring that is called by mistake the Arab Spring, but I think we should call it the Islamic Spring. Islamic Spring because it's Islam which is succeeding to replace any of the old tyrannies that are going down the drain one after the other: Tunisia, Egypt, now Libya, and perhaps tomorrow Syria. That means to say that the Islamic groups are winning, which means that it is the Islamic groups that are going to win ultimately in the minds of these Arabs and Bedouins. You know, in Europe also, by the way, there is a great scare among the Europeans. They call them the bearded ones, those Islamic fundamentalists. And Europe is little by little starting to understand our plight, because they are suffering from it too. And, you know, speaking about those bearded ones, I am reminded that there is some scholar with a beard who is reading some passage in a sacred text. And the passage says that anyone who has a beard longer than 10 inches is stupid. And of course he cannot accept that. He starts testing his own beard, and then he can't help it. He gets up from his desk, he goes to the mirror, he tries to gauge the length, and then he takes a tape and he measures, and lo and behold, it is 15 inches. So of course instinctively he turns to the candle at the light of which he was reading his text, and he tries to burn the surplus. And of course the whole thing catches in fire, and the poor guy wakes up in hospital all burned and defaced, and it took months for him to heal. But when he healed or was released from hospital, he comes home and he finds his book open at the same page, and he reads again, anybody who has a beard longer than 10 inches is stupid. And he adds with his own handwriting on the margin, this was tested and found correct. So those bearded, I have to finish? Well, just tell me. This fear from Islamic fundamentalists, which we also feel very much in this country, as I have said before, has seeped into most of the Bedouin communities in Israel. Now the problem, and I think Seth has illustrated that dramatically, much better than I can do, is the fact that we are living, both of them, I mean both of us, we and them, in some kind of paradox, because as we go along during the last 65 years of the State of Israel, Israel, for reasons of self-image and for reasons of projecting a good image to the world, abroad in general, to our friends, or those few ones that we have, the image that we are democratic and liberal society. And if you are democratic and liberal, you have to open up, you have to respond to human rights concerns, some of which Seth has pointed out. And therefore, we have to accord the Arabs, paradoxically again, more and more instruments in their hands to defeat the Jewish state, whose Jewish contours, they want to alter, they want to change, because they continue consistently to oppose them and to fight them from the root. And as Israel is giving them those instruments, of course they feel much more self-confidence than before, that they can, at every turn, test the borders of those red lines, because we impose no red lines. Every time they gain a little bit more, and we, for fear of losing our self-image of liberalism, we usually give in, and therefore their gains increase and our losses also increase at the same time. And that is the reason why there are, among other things, so many villages that we call illegal villages, because the Israeli government does not dare, or did not dare in the past, to dismantle every one of them immediately after it happened. We go on into all kinds of legal issues which take years. And after years, the settlement which started with 10 families, with tents, becomes 1,000 families with hard building that you cannot destroy so easily without having crowds of international journalists coming, taking pictures and projecting an image of horror to the outside world. And I think we are bound by the very same process, as long as no Israeli government so far has had the courage to reverse that policy around, it will not change, unfortunately. We continue to be held, or to be trapped, if you like, within that same logic that we cultivated ourselves for many years, to be nice and liberal, and we continue to pay the price. And the other side, the Arabs of Israel in general, continue to make the gains. And therefore, here I conclude by saying that while Israel has been making tremendous advances and gains in the world by medicine and agriculture and technology and so on and so forth, and everybody looks at the future of Israel with great hope and great aspirations, and rightly so. You have also to see the other side of the story, which is together with our progress, from which the Bedouins and the other Arabs benefit, we are also, in a certain way, digging our own grave, together with that policy. And that's a very tragic situation, because I think we are trapped in it. In that regard, I'm reminded by that Israeli Minister of Finance, who a few weeks after he took over his portfolio, he made a public lecture to the Israelis, and he said, when I came to the Ministry of Finance, we stood on the verge of the abyss, he said. But since then, we took a big step forward. So beware where you go when you make progress. Thank you very much.